There's a grave on a hillside in Montana I visit every year. No name on it, no dates, no verse from the good book. Only one word, carved deep into a slab of weathered pine. The letters already being swallowed by the bark. One word. No. People who pass it on the trail assume it's a warning, a marker for something ugly. A man who did wrong, maybe. Or a place where wrong things happen. You're not entirely mistaken. I put that word there myself, not so many years back, as it feels. With a chisel I borrowed from my own barn, and hands that hadn't stopped shaking since the morning before. A man who carves a single word like that on his wife's grave. You'd figure he must have hated her. A man can live a long time on a wrong assumption. I came to Montana in 1873 with 160 acres, a mule named Holger, and the specific kind of silence that only exists at 7,000 feet. The land was good, not easy. Nothing out here was easy, but good. Deep grass in the valley, timber on the ridge, a creek that ran cold and clear even in August. A man could build something there. So in the spring of 1877, I rode 2 days to the nearest telegraph office and sent a letter to a placement agency in St. Louis. I require a woman. Strong constitution, able to cook, willing to work, must be comfortable with silence. That last part was important to me, the silence. I had built my entire life around it by then. The quiet of a man who has decided that the world beyond his fence line has nothing left to offer him. The agency wrote back 3 weeks later. They said they had someone. They said she was healthy, hardworking, spoke English and German fluently, and came from good farming stock in Pennsylvania. They left out the violin, left out the Latin. They didn't say nothing about her looking at my woodpile, like it owed her money. The train came into Miles City on a Thursday. I stood on the platform with my hat in my hands and a photograph the agency had sent, a small, modest portrait of a woman looking appropriately solemn in a plain, dark dress. The woman stepped down in a blue dress, not indigo or denim, a clean, sharp blue that belonged in a parlor, not 500 miles into the territory. And she was carrying a violin case. She was taller than I expected, moved like she owned the ground beneath her feet, shoulders back, chin level, eyes already scanning the platform like she was assessing what she'd gotten herself into and hadn't entirely decided yet. She found me before I found her, walked straight over, looked me up and down. And I mean looked, the way you look at a horse before you decide whether it's worth the price. And she said, "You're shorter than your photograph." I said, "I don't own a photograph." She tilted her head. Exactly. Her name was Martha Steiner. She was 34 years old. She had read Virgil in the original Latin and could skin a rabbit in under 4 minutes, though I didn't learn that second part until considerably later. She asked me, standing right there on the platform, whether there was a lending library within riding distance. I told her the nearest one was in Billings. She considered that for a moment. Then she picked up her violin case, her traveling trunk, and started walking toward my wagon. "Well," she said, "I suppose I'll have to make do." She laid them out the second morning, sat across from me at my own kitchen table, both hands wrapped around a tin cup of coffee, and looked at me the way a lawyer looks at a contract. He's about to renegotiate. "I'll do the cooking," she said. "I'll do the mending. I'll help with the livestock. I'll work as hard as any man you've hired. But I want 3 things." I waited. My own room, a bookshelf, and the right to say no to anything I find unreasonable, without owing you an explanation. A man could have laughed. Most would. But I looked at her jaw, and I knew she'd ride out before dark if I said no. So I built her the bookshelf. I used pine from my own mill, cut the joints by hand, carved a small decorative edge along the top, the first unnecessary thing I had made in Montana. She ran her fingers along it when I brought it in. Didn't say anything, but she didn't say no either. 6 weeks after Martha arrived, the clouds came in low and yellow from the southwest, and the cattle were bunching near the North Gulch. A dust storm through that canyon could push a herd off a ledge in 20 minutes. Those animals were everything: the land, the seed money. The next 5 winters all walking around on 4 legs. So I left her the Winchester 73, kissed her on the forehead, the first time I had ever done that, and neither of us remarked on it, and rode out before sunrise. I told myself she'd be fine, but there was still a part of me, deep and stubborn as old timber, that pictured her frightened, waiting, helpless. I was a fool. I just hadn't learned it yet. A mile from home, on the ride back, I heard the Winchester fire. Once, twice. Then a pistol answered it. Smaller, faster. Not mine. I brought her here. I cleared the South Ridge at a winter gallop. 2 men were pinned behind the woodpile she'd stacked along the turf wall. It was thick birch. Stopped a soft lead slug well enough. They were popping rounds at the cabin window, focused on the front, and they never heard me coming from the flank. I didn't slow down. I pulled the Colt and opened up from 30 yards. 3 shots fast as I could work the hammer, not to kill but to break them. Dirt kicking at their boots, 1 round sparking off the axe head. In the chopping block, the nearest man grabbed his arm and lurched backward. The other was already gone, crashing into the tree line. The wounded one dragged himself after, and then the pines swallowed both of them, and the yard went quiet. I sat there on that horse, with smoke rising from the barrel, chest heaving, and looked at the cabin door. Martha! I hit it hard, too loud, too raw. The voice of a man braced for the worst. I kicked the door open. Martha was down on the floorboards, her back propped hard against the bedpost, and the Winchester laid flat across her knees. Her face was the color of wood ash. She looked up at me, her fingers shaking so bad she couldn't force the fresh brass into the loading gate, but her jaw was set. The bastards took 2 of the heifers, she spat. She looked at me, at the Colt, my face, my breathing, and her expression did not change. I dropped their lead horse at the second shot, she said. Right foreleg. Men argue about leaving a lame animal. I didn't want them lingering. I looked at the window. 1 hole. High and deliberate. Are you hurt? She clicked the loading gate shut. No. Flat. Final. A door closing on the question. She set the rifle against the wall and picked up her tea. I stood in my own doorway with a smoking gun and understood, plainly, completely, that I had not saved her. She had already handled it. All of it. Before I ever came over that ridge. That night I watched her grease the bolt on that Winchester. The grease caught the firelight along her throat while she worked. Outside, the wind didn't quit. November came down hard that year. 3 weeks of it without a break. Temperatures so low, the creek froze solid in 3 days. The kind of cold that gets into the walls of a cabin and makes a sound like the wood is cracking open. We were working close. There's no other way to put it. I came in late one evening from the barn. Ice on my beard. Hands so cold I could barely work the latch. Martha was at the fire, her back to me, reading by the light of 2 tallow candles. She was wearing a loose flannel shirt, the kind that falls off one shoulder when you're not paying attention, and her dark hair was down. I had never seen her hair down before. It fell straight and heavy past her shoulder blades, and the firelight moved through it in a way that made the breath catch in my chest before I could stop it. She heard me come in, turned around, saw something in my face. She didn't look away. She set the book down slowly, stood up. She crossed the floorboards, stopped close enough I could smell the tallow on her skin through the grease on my wool coat. Her eyes were level with my chin. She tilted her face up. "You're going to freeze to death in that coat," she said very quietly. And she reached up and began to unbutton it, starting at the collar, her fingers deliberate, her eyes never leaving mine. I should have stepped back. I didn't. The second button, the third. A cedar knot popped in the hearth, heavy and loud like a pistol shot in an empty room. I caught Martha's hands, held them still. "Not like this," I said. She looked at me for a long moment. Something moved behind her eyes. Not hurt, not quite. Something more like understanding. "All right," she said. We stood there like that for what felt like a long time, the fire between us and the dark outside. And then from the upper pasture came the sound I had been dreading for 3 weeks, the low, warning cry of cattle in distress. I was out the door in, under a minute, rifle in hand, with Martha 2 steps behind me, pulling on her coat. We lost 1 calf that night, killed a wolf, worked till past midnight, in the dark and the cold, side by side, without speaking more than necessary. And somewhere in those cold hours, in the blood and the work and the animal simplicity of survival, something settled between us. Christmas that year, she made the cabin into something I didn't have a word for. Red ribbons cut from the lining of her traveling trunk, pine boughs over the door and the window frames, a small fire built in the afternoon, just for warmth, not for cooking. She played the violin that evening, the first time since she'd arrived. I sat in my chair and listened to something. Bach, she told me later, though it meant nothing to me then, and watched the snow come down outside the window and felt something I could not have described to you if you'd asked me. Later I learned there are 2 words for it. The Norwegians have one, koselig. The Germans have another, Geborgenheit. And 2 weeks later, when she came to my side of the cabin in the dark, no firelight this time, just the blue-white of the moon on snow, and she was sure, and I was sure, and there was no ghost from Oslo standing between us anymore. It was the most natural thing in the world. We had 5 children, 3 boys and 2 girls. Martha taught every one of them to read, in English and German, and the oldest 2 picked up a little Latin besides. She took over the books inside of 5 winters, changed how we salted the beef and where we stacked the alfalfa. She was usually right. I told her so. Not as often as I should have. She still said no to things. All her life. To me, to our children, to neighbors, to a county judge once who tried to take 6 acres of our east field through a survey dispute that smelled wrong from the beginning. She was right about that too. The word didn't soften as she got older. If anything, it got cleaner. More certain. She had practiced saying exactly what she meant for 42 years, and she had gotten damn good at it. She died in February. Pneumonia. The same cold that had come for her once before. That first winter, when I had sat beside her for 3 nights and read Tennyson aloud in my broken English because it was the only thing I could think to do. This time, it didn't let her go. I was there at the end, held her hand. The last thing she said to me was in German. Very quiet, very clear. Ich habe mich entschieden. I chose this. I buried her on the hillside above the creek, and I stood there for a long time with a chisel and a slab of pine, trying to think of what to say. Everything seemed wrong, too small, too ordinary, too much like every other grave on every other hillside in every other part of the world. Then I thought about what she had given me. Not comfort, not obedience, not the silence I had so foolishly asked for all those years ago. She had given me the truth of a person who had chosen to be there every single day and had never pretended otherwise. So I carved the word she had made her own, the word that had been her shield, her signature, and in the end, the most honest declaration of love I could think of, because she had said no to 100 things. She had never once said it to me. I found the violin case after, going through her things, the way you do when the house is too quiet and your hands need something to do. There was a bullet inside, brass casing, old, unfired. My name was scratched into the side of it in her handwriting. I turned it over in my fingers for a long time. I understood immediately what it was. A contingency. Kept all those years just in case the man she had married turned out to be the wrong kind of man. She hadn't used it. 42 years, and she hadn't used it. I put it in my chest pocket, where I keep it still. Not because of what I might have been, but because of what she decided I wasn't. The snow's coming down again tonight, same as it always does. Now, I've been carrying this story a long time, and I've asked myself plenty of times whether I deserved her. What do you think? Was she right to choose to stay? Or was the bullet the smarter bet?